the ball, kicks to Jones, wheels around 75 metres from goal, sets it up, Hamill from one direction. Oh, what a wonderful mark. In the opposite direction, Sanderson. And I think it's safe to say Sanderson, a great competitor, but Hamill wanted it most. In fact, it's Corey he marks over and comes down on top of Sanderson's leg.
Once again, early jump, Gaz.
Yeah, great hang time. 8th contested mark for the evening, and I'll tell you what, as Ed said earlier, some teams don't get that many. That is just a player with want and desire greater than anyone else on the ground. That's why he marked the footy.
Terrific mark. He's been at 3 goals. There you go. And he kicks from 50 and puts it straight through the middle.
And our next special guest played 190 games overall, 98 of those with the Saints, 239 goals, 125 of those with the Saints. Captained the club and was one of those big recruiting coups. We spoke about Fraser Gehrig earlier in the program. They came across at the same time at the start of the 2001 season with the likes of Brett Voss and Craig Callaghan and Matthew Capuano. There was Gale, there was Powell from Richmond and a few others as well. And of course, Nick Riewoldt and Justin Kazitsky had just arrived at the club as draftees. And as much as 2001 was tumultuous with the departure of Malcolm Blight, it was perhaps the launching pad for what was a pretty good decade ahead for the Saints. Still involved in the club now and always a very popular player, following up from another one that we had last week, obviously, and Lenny. Aaron Hamill, thanks for jumping on with us.
Pleasure, boys. Appreciate it. I've heard a lot about your podcast, mate. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
That's juicy, Sonny. What have you heard?
Oh, it mightn't be all good things, mate, but I'll tell you at the end. Yeah.
Can't have been too bad of you. Happy to have a chat to us, and especially given, as we said at the time of this podcast, Collingwood's playing Richmond. There, St Kilda's next 2 opponents, so a busy night of scouting, no doubt. But your memories going back, obviously for you personally, I'm sure it was a relatively tumultuous time with the departure from Carlton and how that all sort of came to be. And we know John Elliott's never short of a word, and there was a few things sort of said after that. But can you take us through that perspective and maybe what you found when you arrived at the Saints?
Yeah, we, I mean, you often reflect on that sort of stuff, I guess, because you get asked a fair bit about it, or when trades happen, like how active the Saints have been this year or last season. So 5 new ones that Saints were pretty actively involved, and Hill and Jones and Howard and Butler. So those guys, and then there's talk around when I first got to the club, and Fraser Gehrig, as you mentioned, Laurie, Stevie Lawrence and Capuano, and then of course the picks 1 and 2 in Rue and Cos. So yeah, it's almost what sort of 20 years ago now, but yeah, it got really fond memories. Obviously, coming from a club of Carlton where rich in history in terms of how they were able to win all those flags, I guess, in the 70s and 80s, and really their last one was 95. So I was lucky enough to play in a grand final in 99 at Carlton, and we lost that one to the Kangaroos, and then sort of a year later found myself at the Saints for all sorts of different reasons, really, and probably one that you mentioned before. But I was rapt to come to the club, I guess. You know, you hear a lot about Harvey Burke, Lowe, those sort of names roll off the tongue, and really synonymous with the St Kilda Footy Club. And then you get to work up close with them, and you know, Andrew Thompson in that mix, and Stevie Power came along, as you mentioned, and Bawley and Maguire, and started to build something pretty special there. Was really enough, I guess, looking back on it, really fortunate to play with some unbelievable players, and a Hall of Famer who you had on last week in Lenny Hayes. That when you look at that group, really close in 04, obviously, to playing a couple of prelims, and then when Grant departed, Ross took over. 07, which was my last year. So unfortunately didn't get to play enough footy under Ross, and then we know sort of the rest of it. But that period, got some outstanding friendships out of it. But more importantly, we were able to play and play consistent finals there. And I just my memory was of that is just playing with just so many good players. You know, you can, even the reliable ones like Stevie Baker and Luke Penny and, you know, your so-called foot soldiers, but they were just outstanding to play with. And then you rolled out Hayes and Ball and Harvey, and then Rui, Cos, Milne, Gehrig. You know, I just remember getting the ball on the half-forward line. You just turned because you knew Rui was there, and if Rui didn't get you, Gehrig would, and if he didn't get you, the little tit rat Milne would get you, normally out of the square where he shouldn't be. And then we just had, really, I just remember kicking multiple goals. You know, often we would kick 18, 19, 20 goals, as I'm sure you guys remember. And then we started to tinker around with defence, but Grant was outstanding in terms of just playing on instinct, and letting the boys play. And really, not much has changed. I mean, there's a lot more dynamics and structure involved, but ultimately, you've got to get the talent in. You've got to groom your players how you expect them to play for you, and then still you've got to be able to win your own footy and use the ball well. So. Yeah, just them outstanding memories. Probably didn't end up all that well for me, given my knee complaints in my last year. But you know, I'm really proud of the fact that I was able to captain such a proud and historic footy club over 145 years. So I never ever took that for granted. Just had the lease on the jumper, you know, that I learned from an early age when Kernahan handed me his jumper, number 4. So no one owns it. It's you just I guess you lease the jumper, and what you do in it is up to you. So that's what we preach to our younger guys now. And whilst coaching the VFL at Sandringham, I was able to run the 1 to 4 year development program and hopefully pass on some of the messages that I've learned throughout my 20 odd years being involved. So really, in a nutshell, I know that's a really long answer, but bloody really fortunate to play at St Kilda, and learn a hell of a lot at Carlton and under some legends of the game, really. I was lucky enough to play with 10 of them that are in the team of the century. So, and one of them's coaching the Saints at the moment. So yeah, really lucky, and then go to St Kilda and try and, I think we did have a certain degree of success without getting the ultimate, obviously.
Sammy, the captaincy one's an interesting one, because obviously early in your career, before you left Carlton, you'd kind of been earmarked as one of possibly next captain of Carlton. How did that move happen? Obviously, you alluded to the issue with John Elliott, former president. Who kind of made the move to get you to St Kilda? I mean, obviously you were on the market, but how did that happen?
It's a strange one, Nick. Well, not really strange. The turn of events were I was overseas at the time. Sort of your manager. I was 21 at the time, 22, and you think you know everything, but you know very little, don't you? So, and you think you're bulletproof. And I was overseas at the time. The manager was dealing with that. The time difference was, that was. That I remember getting calls at 2 and 3 and in the morning over there. And looking back on it, had I been in Melbourne, probably getting in front of, McClure and Ken Hunter and Bradley and Williams and Ratton and Kernahan, I assumed I would have stayed. The benefit of hindsight, who knows? So my manager at the time was pretty gung-ho about it. Thomas and Waldron were really keen to obtain my services. Don't forget, as a young kid too, I barracked for Carlton. So, and then I was lucky enough to get the number 4. So, so it was a turn of events that really happened so quick in the space of 4 or 5 hours. So that's ultimately where it led to. Yeah, we had conversations with Elliot. Really, it was over around the drinks anyway. The money, it had nothing to do with that. It was more a fair bit around respect and sort of what you hold, I guess, close to you and your morals. You got to stand for something, otherwise you stand for nothing, I guess. So looking back on it, it was. I'm wrapped that I made the move, but it's one of those things where I was really lucky to go to a footy club like that and learn what I did from as a 17-year-old. So, of course, I came to the Saints and realised we had a fair bit of work to do.
And speaking of standing up, leadership, all that sort of thing, quite often it was viewed from outside the club as, I guess, a little bit of thuggery at times, but we all saw it as standing up for our jumper, standing up for our players, standing up for the club as a whole. Basically, you had a few run-ins with a few players over times, one mainly being Essendon, around about the start of 2004, where even got into the media saying that you were running off the line and picking people off. And how did you view all that from the inside?
Oh, I didn't actually hear that commentary on it, but no, surprise to some, I never got suspended in 13 years. So it was, I must admit, I copped a few fines for mellows, but one of the young boys reminded me today about a tackle on Jay Schultz that I would have got 5 or 6 weeks for nowadays. But yeah, look, I just, I guess the core of it, you just love competing and having a really good understanding of that what you represent. You don't represent just yourself wearing that jumper. From a young age, sort of Carlton was failure's not an option, and you realise pretty quick smart that what's acceptable and what's not. So my biggest thing was you go to all the trouble and you go to the effort in terms of preparing all throughout the week. It's got to be the most important 2 hours of your week. So that's how I viewed it. And the competition of it, which is what you thrive on and you love, and you realise that you're playing at the highest level, and there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. And that's basically, as coaches now and even back then, I don't think we asked too much as coaches. I think we just ask you to turn up, have a crack, and be of decent character. So that was basically my motto. If you're going to pull your boots on, pull them on and give it all you got. And I think you represent so many people, and I don't think St Kilda supporters or any footballers or supporters worry about too many errors. It's about the effort you put in, and I think if they can see you having a crack and it's not working for some reason, you can always hang your hat on that you're having a crack and you're trying to make a difference and have an influence on the ones that matter, which are your teammates.
What you spoke before about being custodians of numbers. In terms of that legacy, obviously you arrived at St Kilda and by chance inherited a number of another former captain from 5 or 6 years earlier in Danny Frawley. And I guess from a coaching point of view, with the events of the last 12 months or so, does it kind of drive that message home to you when you're talking to players? You look at the indelible mark you can leave on a football club as a custodian, as somebody that probably shares that brotherhood of the number 2, if you will.
Yeah, it's quite a. I wouldn't say difficult. It's probably more emotional talking about the big fella in Spud, because there's so many things we miss about him. But even hearing a lot of stories from Rob Harvey and Stewie Lowe and Berkey, probably his closest mates from his playing days, was just his ferocity, just his ability that he loved to compete. And then he went on to clearly be Richmond's coach for 5 years. So he'd been certainly done the rounds in terms of coaching experience and then being in the media. And he was always one he just loved cage. He loved getting our backs in the cage against the forwards. And he always thought he would be a goal kicking coach, because the only way he could get Plugger out in the field was one-on-ones and goal kicking. And he said, I could teach goal kicking better than anyone, because I was standing there on the mark all the time, and all I was watching was his boot, because I wouldn't get him out of the bloody change room unless he said, I'll come out, but I'm not leaving forward 50. That was Lockett's mantra. So competing and I guess was in Spud's era, the 80s, and then because it was genuine one-on-one back then, wasn't it? There wasn't team defence as there is now. So and he at times, I think the last 2 years, he's done our induction with our first year players, handing over the jumper. Nick Rewalt did it as well this year, where he takes the guys through the locker room, your jumper's hanging up there, and then Spud gives a spiel about what the footy club means to him. And that's when you see the real Danny Frawley, and you get a really good understanding. It's not so much the piss take on the bounce that we see or in the media. It's his passion and love for the footy club. And that's his greatest legacy. We went up the farm in pre-season and had a really good chat to Anita, and she walked us around the farm, and obviously we'd heard a fair bit about him, and I got quite close to Spud being, I guess just a sounding board, and he's been there, done that. And, he was really good with his body work and his nous with certain things. So that's the message that we have to our younger players, that, look, some of you are going to be here for 10, 12, 13 years. Some of you are going to be here for 3 or 4. So play your part in the journey, however long that may be. But most importantly is compete, enjoy and respect what you have.
Sammy, you're now a senior assistant coach. You obviously spent a bit of time in the coach's box over the last few years, and with Sandy. We had a pretty positive off-season. Obviously the big trade period, guys getting fit, Max King, Robbo, after a couple of years off. How deflating was that second half and the loss in round 1? And how have you kind of managed that expectation, given we've now had 11 or 12 weeks since?
Yeah, really, really disappointing is the easy answer. To be up by 30 points, arguably should have been up 40, 45 points. And then not to get over the line and lose by 2, really. They changed their game plan in the second half, got us on the outside, smashed us up on the inside, which was the most disappointing part. Goldstein and Cunnington, Zerha, guys that thrive in those conditions, where we did such a good job for really half a game, and then let it slip. So that was really, really disappointing. And I've heard Beveridge's comments the last 10 weeks have been really difficult for him, because you stew over it and you think about it and you put yourself up to be criticised with performances like that, and rightly so. We can't have. We need high expectations. We didn't fail. We didn't pass the test. There was really an exam there, and we didn't get through it. So we've had 10 weeks to have a really good look at it, to see where we're at mind-wise, probably more so than structure and method and game now. So it was a lot to do with probably getting a couple of jabs to the face and not responding in the way that we should have responded. So the pleasing thing is we get another opportunity on our doorstep, and those learnings we need to put into action. I mean, we can talk about it all we want, but unless we do it, it means bugger all. So really good question, mate. It's something that we've all thought about a lot, and the players have thought about it a lot, and we're ready to do something about it.
Yeah, has it been hard at all keeping the players up and about during this time and getting them ready for this week's game?
I mean, you look. I guess blokes were able to process it a little bit differently to some. The pros were pretty good at it, but it's the first and the second year players that, without routine, can struggle. So they our priority was their welfare, clearly. And Tony Brown, who's a star, looks after that department. Our psych, Ben Robbins, and clearly all the coaches involved. And Lethers steered us through that little patch. Did a great job. So we've got all the right people in the right places. So we looked after the boys as best as we could. They've come back in really good condition, but it was only one industry that was hemorrhaging. So the guys are pretty lucky compared to some. They've still got, they're young, they're fit, they're healthy, and they're playing footy. So if all we ask is that they do their program, it's a pretty small sacrifice to make, we believe.
Sammy, thank you very much for jumping on. We'll let you get back to the second half. Good luck Sunday. Good luck over the remainder of the season, and well done on keeping the boys up, and we're certainly looking forward to it.
Thanks, boys. Pleasure anytime.